I am Mrs. Sloan, and this is chapter 26, Flowering Plants, Control of Growth Responses. And we're using this as an illustrative example of cell communication, which is AP Bio Unit 4. All right, so I'm going to make myself a little bit smaller, and as I am, I want to tell you that at the bottom here in the descriptor of the video, that you will have a copy of the notes that I am discussing right now and using with my students. So again, this is focusing on an example of cell communication. All right, so chapter 26, Flowering Plants, Control of Growth Responses. And the first thing is, remember, overall, we've talked about in order to maintain homeostasis, we have to respond to our environment. So animals obviously do that. And plants do this as well. So let's talk about what kind of stimuli plants would be responding to. And you probably can think of a few of these yourself. But on the notes, that plant stimuli could be light, right, in response to light, gravity, carbon dioxide levels, pathogen infections, drought, and touch. So one more time, okay, for your notes, this is the first part of the notes that you want to fill in. Living organisms respond to stimuli. For a plant, that stimuli could be light, gravity, carbon dioxide levels, pathogen infections, drought, touch. These are just all examples of stimuli. So how a plant responds, remember, we've seen this before, signal-transduction pathways. So here are a variety of stimuli. It could be auxin, which is one of your key plant hormones, or categories of plant hormones. Here it's the amount of light. Here it could be a defensive hormone like cystinin. Okay, look at your different receptors here. Remember, signal transduction pathways always start out with a receptor, right? Whether that receptor is on the surface of the cell or intracellularly. So process of responding to stimuli is signal transduction, binding of a molecular signal that initiates and amplifies a cellular response. So the receptors are proteins activated by a specific signal. And here I've given you some different examples of signals. And then the transduction pathway, look right here, auxin is coming in and binding to this receptor. And then here you have light triggering phototropin. We'll learn more about phototropin later, but let me just mention this right now. Phototropism is when a plant responds to light. So you might have a stem bending towards the light. Okay, so this initiates that process. And here you can see some relay proteins here and also here. So a series of relay proteins that amplify and convert the original signal into one that affects the cellular machinery. Now, most often that cellular machinery is going to involve gene expression, what genes are turned on. And when you turn on those genes, you could be giving a defense response, you could be bending a stem, you could growth of a root. Okay, these are all the different types of responses. So on your notes, a cellular response is most often a change in gene expression, or a cellular process that affects plant growth and development. So it's an activated metabolic pathway of some sort. So hormones are the way cells can talk to one another. And we've learned about this already in the endocrine system. So plant hormones are chemical signals that coordinate this response, that coordinate these cellular responses. So remember, hormones are generated in one part of a plant, but they're active in another. So one of the key hormones that was studied, Charles Darwin and his son Francis, and we know about that when we think about natural selection and the mechanisms for evolution, but they also studied Charles Darwin's son studied auxins particularly with phototropism and gravitropism. So auxin, what a cool thing auxin does in summary, okay, is how do you get a plant to grow towards the sun? Well, auxin moves to the shady part of the plant. And on the shady part of the plant, it causes those cells to get larger. So the sunny side of the plant, the cell size is the same, but on the shady side, they're getting taller and bigger. So this bigger cells causes this natural shift, this turning of the stem towards the light. So that's if you look at underneath auxins, IAA is the most common. And this is, you need auxin for embryo survival, but auxin does many things, right? I'm going to just hear of all the jobs that it does, and I'll touch each one of those. But how does it enact phototropism, this growing towards the light? So this is an example. Here you can see they're bending towards the light, but it's called the acid growth hypothesis. So you know what an acid is, right? Increased hydrogen ions. So look what's happening here. Here's auxin, right? Binding to the receptor. Look what's happening here. It's causing, using ATP, hydrogen ions to move out into the cell wall. And what this ends up doing is weakening the cell wall so that what it allows is, by weakening the cell wall, remember when water moves into the plant, into the vacuole, remember we talked about turgor pressure, the wall is not going to be as resistive because it's weakening, and it'll stretch the cell wall, and then you'll end up making the cell wall bigger. Here you can see the growth factors. Here you can see those cell wall building materials coming from the Golgi apparatus, in order to basically repair this stretched out wall. And why is it stretched out? Because it got weakened by those hydrogen ions. So on your notes, underneath stem bending towards the light, phototropism, okay, stem bending towards the light is phototropism. Auxin concentrates the cells in the cells on the shady side of the plant, and this is what it's doing on the shady side. Hydrogen ions are pumped into the walls, and the walls weaken. The walls weaken because the change in pH activates enzymes, break down cellulose fibers, and will result in that it gets rebuilt even larger, even bigger. And this is what causes that asymmetrical elongation. So this is called the acid growth hypothesis. So let's keep going here. Possibly, I just lost my pointer. Sorry, there we go. So another thing that, besides growth, under the growth and development umbrella, you also have gravitropism. And gravitropism is like, so you're taking this plant, you're setting on a side, and it's responding to that change to get the leaves to still grow upwards and the stems to grow upwards. It's responding, and it would be responding negatively to the gravity, right? Because gravity is saying go down, and the stems and the leaves are growing up. So that would be a negative response, whereas the shoots would have a positive response to gravity, and the roots would turn down where the shoots turn up. So gravitropism, roots would grow down, right? And the shoots are growing up. Another response, so we have phototropism and gravitropism, and this is the idea of apical dominance. So let me make myself larger here just for a minute. Okay. So you have apical meristems, and that would be at the top of the shoot. We're going to talk about the shoot up at the top, okay? And when a plant grows, okay, let's think about it logically. As it's growing up, you don't want it to immediately branch out on the side, because then your largest branches would be at the very top, tippy top of the tree. And you could see that that would be negative, because those large branches, if you immediately started branching out, they would, you would have shade the lower branches so they wouldn't get any light. So that's why it would be better for a plant to grow up and then later for it to branch down, so your biggest branches are on the bottom, right? So auxin does that by what it's called apical dominance, which it inhibits at the top of the shoot. It inhibits any lateral branching. And what they've done is they've pinched off the tops of plants. And when they do that, then you don't have that apical dominance, and it immediately starts branching. And then that would shade the lower branches. And also then your heaviest branches would be on the top, and you might tip over. So you can see here, okay, here, these are not branching because you have that apical dominance, but when they snip off the top of the plant, then they start branching, and that would not be the healthiest environment for that plant. So on your notes, B, apical dominance, as auxin moves down from the shoot tips, it inhibits branching. It inhibits that lateral growth, which then focuses plant growth up, okay? If not, the plant would become really, really bushy. Okay. It also, just some other items we want to throw in there about auxin. It promotes growth of roots and fruit, and it also prevents the loss of leaves and prevents the loss of fruit. So auxin, I want you to think about this as the go, go, go hormone, right? Auxin is saying, let's grow up, you know, let's facilitate the growth. Let's get more fruit. Let's keep our leaves. And so commercially, this is used to develop fruits that are seedless. I've talked about that before. And then Agent Orange is a synthetic auxin that was used to overstimulate growth beyond what the plant could support, which would then kill off those plants. All right, so that is auxin. Gibbsellins. Gibbsellins also facilitates growth, but just in a different way. It's not using the acid growth hypothesis. It's binding with DNA to cause cells to elongate. Now, I want you to see something here. Look right here. This is Gibbsellins, and then look. Remember when we talked about second messengers? Here comes calcium again. So the basics, it causes cell elongation, Gibbsellins, and there are about 136 different types of Gibbsellins, so that's just like a class of hormones. It also breaks bud and seed dormancy. So what that is, so here you can see it's causing these plants to grow. What it causes buds to open up, and it causes seeds to develop. So Gibbsellins is opening up buds and also seeds. So it breaks their dormancy. In commercial uses, you can also, how man has used this for their purposes is for getting larger fruits, etc. I wanted to show you this first though, sorry. So if we look right here, here's Gibbsellin binding to a receptor, which is letting in the second messenger, calcium, who is binding with a receptor inside, which is affecting the transcription of the DNA into mRNA and increasing the size of that cell. All right. And like I said, it also is used commercially to make things like grapes be larger. All right. Next is cytokinin. And if you think about, you're going to learn later the steps of mitosis. We haven't learned that in my class yet. But mitosis is nuclear division and cytokinesis is the division of the cytoplasm. So cytokinin, this particular hormone, also makes plants grow, but not by making the cells larger like auxin and gibberellin do in two different ways, but it makes plants larger by making them make more cells, by encouraging the process of cell division. So it promotes, on your notes for cytokinins, it promotes cell division and organ formation, and it works in tandem with auxin. So interacts with auxin, and it's responsible for root nodule formation. And the reason why you'd want those root nodules is to house bacteria for nitrogen fixation. So nitrogen fixing bacteria. All right. So it works in a ratio with auxin to cause different development, whether it would be roots or leaves or flowers. It also prevents senescence. The aging process. So on your notes right there, prevents senescence, the aging of plants. It's like an natural anti-ager, cytokinins. Let's see. I wanted to mention that the leaves turn colors like in the winter, in the fall, and that's due to low levels of cytokinin. Commercially, some lettuce has been genetically modified to produce cytokinins at the onset of aging, so they don't wilt or brown, and you can use them in the grocery stores longer. They last longer. Okay, so now we've had several go hormones, right? We looked at auxin, which affects so many different things. I gave you like 5 or 6 different jobs that auxin does, but it is promoting that cells get larger and they grow towards the light and they deal with gravity. And then we looked at gibberellins, remember, and then gibberellins promote cell growth not by the acid growth hypothesis, but they affect the DNA, which makes cells larger. We looked at cytokinin, which is a go hormone because it makes you make more cells. So we have all these go-go's. This is a stop. Okay, this is abscisic acid, and it's closing things down in the short term and in the long term. So it is basically your stress hormone. So in the long term, it can prevent it. It will promote wintering, which is getting ready for that cold weather. And so it causes the leaves to fall off. It increases what's called the abscission layer, where the leaf is attached to the branch. It causes that abscission layer so that the leaves fall off. So on your notes, abscisic acid is produced in chloroplasts due to stress, a stress hormone. It promotes dormancy, where you cease to grow. And dormancy is a response to adverse conditions, like winter for the plant. Okay, so this is causing it to like, hey, let's slow down our growth and prepare for winter. Okay, and then in the immediate stress, it could be the stress of water loss. So again, it's saying, stomata, we better close because we're losing too much water. So here you can see abscisic acid binding to a receptor. Lo and behold, what's happening again? Second messenger, calcium is coming in to the cell, which then causes potassium to leave the cell, which then causes the vacuoles to get smaller. So they're not pushing the stomata open because they don't have that turgor pressure, and they're becoming more flaccid, and it's closing the stoma. Okay, so closing stomata under water stress. All right, we have one more hormone to go. And that hormone is ethylene. And I always think of this as an aging, like old Aunt Ethel. And this causes fruit to ripen, and it causes fruit to drop. So this is a gas hormone, and it can travel through the air. So one ripening fruit can cause other fruits to ripen as well, because this hormone is secreted through the air. So it stimulates cellulase. Now that makes sense. ACE enzyme, cellulase, which is weakening the softening of those cell walls. And you've done this if you've picked out like nectarines or peaches from the store, or an avocado. When it's really hard, you're like, oh, I can't eat that, right? But when it's softer, you can eat that, and it's sweeter, right? And that's because this enzyme is breaking down those cell walls. So it causes leaf, fruit, and flowers to drop. And then here, you can see this right here, they've taken a holly branch and just put it underneath this beaker. And here they put a ripe apple in with it. And then because it's a gaseous hormone, then it's traveling through the air and then causing the holly itself to lose its own leaves. Here, this one tomato can affect all these other tomatoes because it's releasing that gaseous hormone. This is why if you have a bowl of fruit, if you put a banana in there that's starting to ripen, it's going to make all the other bananas ripen really fast as a result of it spreading through that area. So on your notes, you have one, it causes abscission of leaf, fruits, and flowers, and it promotes fruit ripening. All right. And this is how you can say one bad apple spoils the barrel, because if you were storing apples and just one of them was very ripe in there, it would cause all of them to ripen immediately. All right. And then also this is some of the exhaust from cars causes that as well. And I just kind of threw that in there. All right. So here's a list of those different plant hormones and how the plant uses them, and then how commercially we have taken advantage of those plant hormones to use them for our own purposes. All right. Now, underneath this heading, I have plant defenses. And you're going to have a hyperdoc if you're in my class where we'll go a little bit more into this, but those can be both physical defenses like bark, right? Because it's harder to get at that plant if it's got that protective layer of bark. And they can also be chemical defenses. So it could be something that is secreted by the plant or the plant cells. So on responding to the biotic environment, let me just back it up a little bit. Everything I've talked to you about so far is responding to the abiotic, non-living environment, right? Like the amount of light that is available. So this would be responding to biotic factors, things like herbivory, right? Herbivores that are trying to eat them, or parasites and competition from other plants. So you can have these physical structures like bark, right? You could have stinging hairs, right, that secrete toxins. That would be something that would be a chemical response. But this one, this is great because this is showing you how the plant can defend itself against some sort of pathogen. So that pathogen could be releasing a chemical, right, that binds to a receptor, triggering a signal transduction pathway, which then goes and releases a chemical to protect the rest of that plant. And so that the whole plant can be protected from this invasion on just one leaf. And that would be a direct response to that pathogen. And if you look underneath the notes that I have right there, you need more than the epidermis that can be chewed through. So you have metabolites that can be released. And underneath that, you have both a direct defense and indirect defense. And I'm going to give you some examples of that as well. So this would be a response to a wound that just like we get wounds, plants can get wounds when herbivores chew on them, right? So here you can see this wounded plant cells produce histamine, which then triggers this signal transduction pathway, ultimately affecting the activation of some inhibitors that are it could be a chemical that acts as a poison to that herbivore, and also sends out the signal to the rest of, here you can see where the leaf is wounded, but it's protecting the rest of the plant by sending a chemical signal to the rest of the plant to say, hey, you need to produce some toxins that are going to irritate this herbivore or make this herbivore sick when it chews. And that would be a direct response to it. So underneath direct defenses, these are all the plant traits that increase the resistance, all the plant traits that increase the resistance of the host plants to insect herbivores by affecting the physiology or the behavior of the attackers. So you're immediately responding to that attacker. Now that would be a direct plant defense. So let me show you another picture here. So here's your herbivore chewing on the plant, right? And so what can happen with a direct defense is what I just mentioned. So you're producing some sort of toxin to protect yourself from it. Now an indirect defense, this is really cool. So plants can secrete chemicals or provide food or housing for the enemy of their enemy. Okay, for the enemy of their enemy. So if this herbivore is their enemy, plants can actually attract predators of that herbivore. And they can literally attract carnivores to come and hunt that herbivore. So that would be an indirect defense. So on your notes, indirect, attract natural enemies of the herbivores to reduce plant loss and even provide food or shelter to carnivores. So that would be an indirect defense. And here, okay, so here they are attracting a predator to this young caterpillar who is eating their leaves. They say, hey, come over here and protect us. And you can eat these lovely caterpillars who are chewing on me. Here you can see a mutualistic relationship. We've talked about this before between ants and acacia trees, where the acacia trees actually provide a home, a shelter for these ants, as well as food. So if an herbivore comes over to chew on them, that the ants will immediately swarm. So this would be an indirect defense. All right, so that is your overview of the plant hormones, and I'm going to make a second video about plants responding through growth and movements as well. All right, so good job.